A routine flight turned into a viral sensation when a first-class seat dispute revealed shocking truths. Was it just an isolated incident, or the tip of a systemic injustice iceberg? Stay tuned as this explosive story uncovers the collision of prejudice, power, and an unyielding fight for justice. JFK Airport buzzed with life and urgency. Announcements blared over the intercom, mingling with the rhythmic clatter of suitcase wheels and hurried footsteps. Neon lights reflected off the glass walls, painting a familiar picture of hustle and chaos. In a corner of the waiting area, Imani Carter appeared, standing out effortlessly among the crowd. She walked with steady confidence, shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering. Clad in a fitted athletic suit that highlighted her strong frame, she rolled a small suitcase behind her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and a few people pulled out their phones to snap pictures. A young boy wearing a basketball jersey with her name on it waved enthusiastically. Across the check-in counter, Avery Thompson kept her head down, eyes fixed on the passenger list. Her hand gripped a pen tightly, the glow of the computer screen casting a pale light on her weary face. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the upcoming flight and the tasks that awaited her. Imani moved through the crowd with an air of quiet assurance, yet her eyes stayed attentive, scanning her surroundings. A young girl in a basketball uniform hesitantly approached, hands trembling as she held her phone. "Imani, can I take a picture with you?" she asked timidly. Imani stopped, her radiant smile breaking through the tension in the room. She knelt to meet the girl's eye level, gently placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Of course. What's your name?" "Chloe," the girl replied, her voice shaking. Imani held Chloe's gaze, her expression filled with encouragement. "Chloe, remember this. You can do anything. Always believe in yourself, okay?" The two posed for a photo, met with soft cheers and admiration from onlookers. As Imani walked away, she felt a familiar weight settle in her chest, the growing responsibility of being more than an athlete, of being a symbol of hope for her community. Across the terminal, Avery tried to maintain her professionalism as she hurried through the hallway, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Her phone buzzed again, and with a resigned sigh, she pulled it out to read the latest message from her ex-husband. "We need to talk about the house. Stop avoiding this." Avery bit her lip, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, shoving the phone back into her pocket as she willed her emotions into submission. She resumed her work with forced composure. Passing a colleague, she was stopped abruptly. "You okay, Avery? You seem stressed." "I'm fine," Avery snapped, her tone sharp. "I just want this flight to go smoothly. Please, don't ask again." A strained smile flickered across her face before she moved on. But inside, she felt like she was on the verge of breaking, caught between the demands of her job, the drawn-out divorce, and the mounting expectations from every direction. The pressure felt suffocating. In the same space, two starkly different realities played out. Imani radiated confidence and hope, like a lighthouse guiding others through their own storms. Meanwhile, Avery resembled a fragile boat, battered and struggling against relentless waves. Neither of them knew that in just a few hours, their lives would collide in ways neither could have anticipated. The passengers had settled into their seats, and the engine began to rumble, blending with the soft hum of the pre-flight announcement. The dim golden glow of the first-class cabin lights exuded warmth, offering a sense of calm and serenity. Imani Carter reclined comfortably in her plush leather seat by the window. Wireless earbuds snugly nestled in her ears, she scrolled through social media posts about the grand charity event she was set to attend that evening. The outpouring of encouragement and high expectations from her fans drew a fleeting smile across her lips. Suddenly, a firm voice shattered the tranquil atmosphere, startling her. "Miss Carter, I need to speak with you," came the sharp tone of Avery Thompson, the head flight attendant. Avery stood ramrod straight beside Imani's seat, her face stern and her gaze devoid of sympathy. Imani removed her earbuds, her bright eyes meeting Avery's with composure, though a hint of confusion flickered across her face. "Is something wrong? Is there an issue with the flight?" she asked, her tone calm yet curious. Avery cleared her throat, glancing briefly at the clipboard in her hands before responding in a clipped, matter-of-fact voice. "There's been a mistake with the seating arrangement, Miss Carter. We need you to move to economy class. This seat has been reserved for another passenger." Imani's brow furrowed, her surprise evident but quickly replaced by her characteristic poise. She reached into her coat pocket and retrieved her ticket, holding it up for Avery to see. "A mistake? This is my ticket. I paid for this seat. As you can see, it clearly belongs to me," she said, her voice steady yet laced with subtle authority, enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. Avery hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the ticket. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly steeled herself. Her voice grew colder, tinged with impatience. "Miss Carter, I understand you have a valid ticket, but we must adhere to protocol. These things happen occasionally, and there's nothing we can do to change it. We need your cooperation to relocate you to economy." Imani locked eyes with Avery, her face unflinching, though her voice carried a sharp edge. "Protocol? Let me get this straight. Your protocol allows a passenger with a valid ticket to be downgraded to economy? This is hardly how a respectable airline treats its customers." Avery exhaled deeply, the strain evident on her face. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, but she ignored it. The weight of Imani's piercing gaze and the murmurs of the surrounding passengers only seemed to harden her resolve. "Miss Carter, I'm not here to argue. I'm doing my job and following directives from higher up. If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to involve security." Imani's lips curved into a faint, sardonic smile as she shook her head, her voice low yet firm, brimming with quiet disappointment. "Really? You say that as though these unjust policies were decreed by God himself. But I don't think God would approve of seeing someone treated this way, especially when you know I've done nothing wrong." The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, their eyes darting between Imani and Avery. A few discreetly pulled out their phones, though no one dared to intervene. Avery lowered her head slightly, her tone icy and resolute as she delivered her final statement, brushing off the unspoken accusations in Imani's words. "Miss Carter, please move. It's our responsibility to ensure this flight departs on time." Imani rose slowly, refusing to utter another word of protest. Her fingers tightened around her ticket, knuckles white from the force of her grip. Her gaze swept over Avery one last time, cold and unyielding, as if burning the image of the flight attendant into her memory. "Fine," Imani said, her voice trembling faintly with restrained emotion. "But remember this, God sees everything. You can follow your protocol, but justice will not remain silent." Imani walked slowly through the airplane cabin, her shoulders straight, though every step felt heavier under the gaze of the passengers. Reaching the economy section, she slid into her seat between two strangers, the frustration etched clearly on her face. She lifted her carry-on bag, struggling slightly as she shoved it into the overhead compartment. The latches clicked, but no one paid attention. Imani pulled out her headphones but didn't put them on, holding them absently in her hand instead. her fingers clenched tightly around her crumpled boarding pass. A fleeting thought crossed her mind. Is this because I don't look like them? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. When she reopened them, the golden light of the setting sun spilled through the window, casting a serene yet melancholic glow across her face. Behind her, a middle-aged man discreetly recorded everything. The camera on his phone had been aimed at Imani ever since she was escorted out of first class. In the video, their exchange was audible, Imani's restrained civility tinged with disappointment and Avery's stiff, authoritative tone asserting his position. Adjusting his angle, the man captured her dragging her bag through the narrow aisle, walking slowly under the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. When the plane reached cruising altitude, he stopped recording. The final frame lingered on Imani, staring out the window, her face illuminated by the fiery hues of the sunset. The man quickly edited the footage, adding a caption. This young woman is a victim of systemic prejudice. This cannot be tolerated. #Justice for Imani. Seconds later, the video was posted on social media. It began to garner likes and shares almost immediately. Comments poured in. This is disgusting. How can they treat someone like that? Imani Carter, the basketball star? This is shameful. As the plane taxied toward the runway, preparing for takeoff, the man switched off his phone, confident the video would ignite a firestorm. The moment the plane reached cruising altitude, the video of Imani Carter was uploaded to social media and spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, the post had been shared thousands of times, sparking a wave of outrage. The hashtag Justice for Imani shot to the top of trending topics, drawing attention from fans and social activists alike. The comments flooded in. Unbelievable. It's 2024, and this kind of discrimination still exists? Imani Carter, a symbol of our community, treated like this just because of her skin color? An article accompanying the video highlighted the pain in Imani's eyes as she was forced to leave her first-class seat, framing the incident not just as a personal injustice but as a reflection of the broader struggles faced by the community. In less than an hour, the video had garnered over 1 million views. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook were awash with posts and images related to the incident. Advocacy groups for racial equality quickly took notice. One activist tweeted, "This is a textbook example of the discrimination that persists every day. We cannot stay silent." Celebrities began to speak out. Imani is an inspiration. It's heartbreaking to see her treated this way. Change must happen. The video became the center of a heated debate about justice and equality. Images from the footage, especially the moment Imani bowed her head, her gaze distant, soon turned into a symbol of systemic injustice. When the plane landed, Imani stepped out of the baggage claim area, dragging a small suitcase behind her. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, calls, and notifications. The hashtag Justice for Imani remained the top trend. Her face now appeared on headlines across media platforms, often paired with the haunting image of her bowed head as she left first class. She opened a message from her biggest sponsor. "We hope you'll make a statement soon. The public is waiting." Another message from her agent read, "Are you okay? Don't delay your response. The press is circling." She pulled her suitcase to a nearby bench, intending to sit and gather her thoughts, but a fan approached her. "Imani, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. You don't deserve this. We stand with you." A faint smile crossed her lips, but her heart felt heavy. She knew this incident was no longer just about her. It had become a symbol for a much larger fight. Imani bowed her head, her hand gripping the handle of her suitcase tightly as she whispered a prayer. "Lord, please guide me. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't ignore this either." Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Swift Skies Airlines, the atmosphere in the emergency meeting room was thick with tension. On the massive screen dominating the room, the viral video of Imani played on repeat, a relentless reminder of the escalating public outrage. A senior manager, his face drawn tight with anxiety, spoke hurriedly. "We need to issue a response immediately. Delaying will only make this situation worse." The PR director, poised and clinical, nodded. Her voice was icy, every word measured with precision. "We'll release an apology, emphasizing that this was the isolated action of an individual employee and does not reflect the company's values. Someone needs to take the fall to diffuse public pressure." Another executive chimed in, his tone decisive and unwavering. "She's a veteran flight attendant, isn't she? That makes it simpler. Terminate her immediately and make it public. We need to show we don't tolerate behavior like this." A younger assistant hesitated before speaking, their voice soft but filled with unease. "But is that fair? We haven't even conducted a thorough investigation yet." The PR director cut them off sharply, her words slicing through the air like a knife. "This isn't the time for debates. This airline cannot afford another scandal. Suspend her immediately and release the decision before the end of the day. It's the only way to protect our image." The meeting ended with a grim consensus. All blame would fall squarely on Avery Thompson, the veteran flight attendant who had just completed the ill-fated flight. Moments later, Avery's phone buzzed as she made her way out of the airport. She answered, her heart sinking as her supervisor's cold, unrelenting voice came through the line. "Avery, you need to come to the office immediately. We need to talk." Avery stepped into the managerial office at Swift Skies, an overwhelming sense of unease tightening her chest. The room was stark and cold, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that reflected off the blank, sterile walls. Facing her were three individuals: the HR director, the PR executive, and her direct supervisor. Their expressions were severe, their postures unyielding. The HR director, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes framed by gold-rimmed glasses, was the first to speak. Her voice was sharp, devoid of any warmth. "Ms. Thompson, I assume you've seen the video currently circulating on social media?" Avery nodded, her voice unsteady as she replied, "Yes, I saw it after the flight ended. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I was just following protocol, as per our training." The PR executive, a man in a crisp black suit with an icy demeanor, cut her off before she could explain further. "Regardless of your intentions, your actions in that video have caused a significant crisis for the airline. We are under immense pressure from the public, the media, and our shareholders. This situation is unacceptable." Avery opened her mouth to respond, but her supervisor interjected immediately. "Avery, we understand you may not have acted maliciously, but the public doesn't care about intent. All they see is discriminatory behavior, and we cannot let this tarnish Swift Skies' reputation." Avery's eyes darted between the three faces before her. The walls seemed to close in as she struggled to steady her breath. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm despite the rising tide of anxiety. "But you all know I'm not discriminatory. I followed the booking system's instructions. This was a system error, not mine. I don't deserve to be treated this way." The PR executive's tone remained cold and unyielding. "We're not denying that the system may have failed. But the issue now is that the public demands immediate accountability. The airline has decided to suspend you, effective immediately, and this decision will be made public following this meeting." Avery froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Suspension? You're making me the scapegoat? This wasn't my fault, and you all know it." The HR director's voice grew sterner, her words cutting through the air. "Avery, calm down. This is the best course of action to protect the company's image. You'll receive compensation during the suspension, and once the situation settles, we may revisit your case." A bitter laugh escaped Avery's lips, her expression twisting with indignation. "Revisit my case? After you've thrown me to the wolves to pacify public outrage? God must be watching, and I hope he sees the hypocrisy in how you operate." Her supervisor shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The PR executive, unfazed by her defiance, continued as though she hadn't spoken. "The termination notice will be sent to the press within an hour. You are instructed not to make any public statements about this matter. If you violate this directive, we will take legal action." Avery shot to her feet, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of frustration and fury. Clutching her bag tightly, she spoke with quiet resolve. "Say whatever you want, but the truth has a way of coming out. I hope you're prepared for it when it does." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, the sound of the door slamming reverberating through the cold, silent room. Shortly after, Swift Skies released an official statement across all its media platforms. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on our recent flight involving passenger Imani Carter. The actions of flight attendant Avery Thompson do not reflect the values and standards of Swift Skies. We have suspended Ms. Thompson effective immediately and are committed to implementing measures to improve our systems, ensuring all passengers are treated with fairness and care. We extend our sincerest apologies to Ms. Carter and the broader community." Beneath the post, thousands of comments poured in. While some applauded the airline's swift response, many raised doubts. Suspending an employee doesn't fix systemic problems. What about your policies? This isn't just a personal mistake. Feels like you're scapegoating to appease the public. How about real action instead of empty apologies? Still, the airline seemed to achieve its immediate goal, quelling the public backlash by pinning the blame on Avery Thompson, a single individual, rather than confronting the deeper flaws in their system. After being fired, Avery Thompson's life spiraled into darkness. She stayed holed up in her apartment, curtains drawn tightly shut. Her inbox overflowed with hateful messages. "You're a disgrace to the airline industry. We know where you live. Watch your back." Each time she opened an email, her hands trembled. One day, unable to bear it any longer, she slammed her laptop shut and hurled it onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. Even a simple trip to the store was unbearable. She felt the judgment in every stare. An older woman glared at her and whispered to a companion, "That's the flight attendant from the video." In the aisles, a man brushed past her, his voice loud and cutting. "People like her shouldn't work with the public." Avery lowered her head, trying to maintain composure, but the suffocating sense of isolation overwhelmed her. She whispered to herself, "God, why has it come to this? I was just doing my job. Why do I have to endure all this?" Sitting alone in her darkened apartment, hugging her knees, Avery felt like a scapegoat, sacrificed by a system that had abandoned her to bear the blame. Meanwhile, across the city, Imani Carter wrestled with her own storm of emotions. Her phone buzzed constantly with invitations from human rights organizations, journalists, and politicians. Her manager sat across from her, trying to convince her. This is a huge opportunity. The International Human Rights Organization wants you as the face of their press conference on systemic injustice. Imani frowned, her voice filled with concern. I don't want to be a political pawn. This isn't a performance. The manager sighed. But all eyes are on you. Your decision will impact countless others. Imani picked up her phone, staring at the viral video of herself, the quiet look in her eyes, the solitary figure walking away from first class. Those images had become symbols of a movement for justice, but to her, they felt heavy and out of control. She murmured, "God, I want to do the right thing, but I'm scared of losing control. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't ignore the expectations of so many." She lifted her head, meeting her manager's gaze with determination. "I'll speak up for what I believe in, not for anyone else's agenda." The manager nodded but cautioned, "The public won't wait forever." Imani turned to the window, watching as the pale hues of sunset faded into twilight. She understood that her decision would ripple far beyond herself, touching the lives of thousands. Late in the afternoon at the law office, Imani Carter sat across from her attorney, Jonathan Hale, a seasoned professional with neatly combed salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes that radiated both expertise and determination. The fluorescent lights cast a bright, sterile glow over the room, and a thick folder bound neatly with a clip rested on the desk between them. The atmosphere was so still that the faint sound of pages turning echoed as Jonathan opened the file. He tapped the cover gently, locking eyes with Imani, his voice low and steady. "Imani, I've been digging deeper into your case over the past few weeks. What we've uncovered is not only surprising, but could potentially expose something much bigger. I need you to prepare yourself." Jonathan began flipping through the file deliberately, revealing pages marked with vivid red highlights, each one demanding attention. He pointed to a bolded section in the middle of an internal airline report. "This is one of the internal directives given to the airline's crew and ground staff. It outlines how to handle conflicts regarding seating or service. According to this document, priority is always given to passengers classified as VIP." Imani frowned, sitting up straighter. Her tone was curious, but tinged with suspicion. "VIP? How do they define that? Isn't every first-class passenger supposed to be treated like a VIP?" Jonathan sighed, his voice dropping a notch. "The issue lies in their definition of the term. From our investigation, it turns out that VIP is essentially coded language used to prioritize a specific type of customer, those the airline believes can provide the most positive commercial impression. When we looked deeper, we discovered that within the company, this term is often used as a euphemism for white passengers." Imani froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the document. Reaching for the page, she read the bolded lines carefully. "In cases of conflict, prioritize passengers who represent the airline's standard image." Looking up, her voice quivered slightly, a mix of disbelief and growing anger. Standard image? What do they mean by that? How can they possibly justify running a modern airline like this? Jonathan nodded grimly, the weight of the revelation apparent in his expression. "Imani, we didn't stop with the documents. We also gathered testimony from former employees who left the airline in recent years. One of them confirmed that they were trained to handle such situations by making decisions based on racial preference, though it was never explicitly stated." Imani set the paper down, her hands trembling slightly as her grip tightened. Her voice, now edged with cold clarity, carried restrained fury. "So what I experienced on that flight wasn't just a personal incident. This wasn't about Avery. This is a system designed to operate this way. She was just another cog in their machine." Jonathan nodded solemnly, his tone grave. "Exactly. What you saw was only the tip of the iceberg. The real issue is how this system has been allowed to persist for years unchecked, because no one has dared to challenge it. They never thought the truth would come to light." Imani stared at the folder on the desk, her eyes stormy with a mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness. She exhaled deeply, pressing her fingers to her temples to ease the throbbing headache that had begun to creep in. "God, how has this been going on for so long without anyone noticing? And if I don't speak up, who will?" Jonathan remained silent for a moment before speaking, his voice calm, yet weighted with understanding. Imani, I know this isn't easy. But you have to realize, when you boarded that flight, you weren't just a passenger. You're a symbol for a community. People will listen to you, but only you can decide what you want to say. Imani stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the sky as the late afternoon sun painted it in vibrant shades of orange and gold. Placing her hand against the cool glass, she let her thoughts drift. Her voice, quiet but filled with turmoil, broke the silence. Jonathan, I don't know if I'm ready to speak this truth. If I do, it's not just my story I'm changing. It's how people will see an entire industry. Jonathan rose from his chair and approached her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His voice was firm, encouraging. Imani, sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest steps. And you're the person with the strength to take that step. I'll be with you every step of the way, but the final decision is yours. Imani didn't respond immediately. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as an internal battle waged within her, the fear of the fallout and the weight of her responsibility. A single tear slid down her cheek, but when she opened her eyes, there was a glimmer of resolve in them. Turning back to Jonathan, she gave a small, firm nod. All right, we'll do this. But I want the truth out there, clear and unembellished. No spin, no political agenda. I won't be anyone's tool. Jonathan nodded, a faint smile softening his expression. Understood. We'll do the right thing the right way. That night, in her apartment, Imani paced back and forth, clutching the stack of documents Jonathan had handed her. The glittering lights of New York spilled through the window, but her mind was in turmoil. She stopped in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, tired eyes filled with inner conflict. Letting out a heavy sigh, she questioned herself. If I speak out, the truth will come to light. But what will happen to Avery? Will the public direct their anger at the real system, or will this spiral into a battle I can't control? Imani placed her hand against the cold surface of the mirror, her palm pressed firmly to the glass. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind. They need you to speak up. You're not just a victim, you're a symbol of a movement. Closing her eyes, she gripped the edge of the mirror tightly and whispered a prayer. Lord, you've placed me in this position, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. If I speak, the truth will come out, but will anyone truly listen? I'm afraid of causing more harm. She moved to the window, the glow of traffic below reflecting in her eyes. For the first time, she felt small under the weight of the responsibility God had given her. You said the truth would set us free. But if the world doesn't want freedom, what am I supposed to do? Looking down at her hands once steady with the confidence of holding a basketball, now trembling slightly, Imani realized that fear and responsibility were intertwined, binding her tightly. She returned to the desk, picking up her phone. Hesitating for a moment, she finally pressed the call button. Jonathan Hale's voice answered on the second ring. Imani, I'm here. Have you made your decision? She took a deep breath, her voice firm. We have to do this. But no political games. I want the truth to come out as it is. No spin, no new victims. Jonathan's voice softened with understanding. I understand. I promise to keep it honest and fair. Very few people have the courage to face the truth like you do. I believe God chose you for this mission, and I'm here to help you see it through. Imani looked out at the city lights, still shining brightly, indifferent to the personal battles being fought beneath them. Placing her hand against the window pane, she accepted what she had to do. Thank you, Jonathan. Let's do this the right way, for truth and justice. If this is the test God has given me, I won't turn away. Jonathan's relief was evident. "You're not alone. We'll face this together." Imani set the phone down, her gaze steady. The darkness of the city no longer weighed her down. A fire of resolve had been lit within her, and it burned brighter than ever. As Imani Carter stepped into her fight for truth, Avery Thompson grappled with the crushing aftermath. She had lost her career, her dignity, and now, even her way forward. One gray morning, Avery left her apartment, her eyes shadowed from countless sleepless nights. In her mailbox, she found an envelope from Swift Skies. She opened it to read the cold, impersonal letter. Cultural sensitivity training is mandatory. Completion of the course will result in consideration for reemployment. Her grip tightened on the paper, the bitterness rising in her throat. This felt like an unspoken sentence, a tacit admission of guilt for simply following procedure. On the second day of training, Avery sat quietly in a bright, sterile room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The words on the whiteboard loomed over her. Inclusion begins with understanding. Understanding begins with listening. The facilitator, a poised middle-aged woman, spoke calmly. "We are not born to perpetuate injustice, but our actions or silence often reinforce it." A short video played, illustrating seemingly minor behaviors that upheld deep-rooted biases. Avery bowed her head, replaying the moment on the flight when she asked Imani to move. She had believed she was following protocol, but now that certainty felt fragile. The practical exercise began. Participants were asked to share their experiences with injustice. A young woman, her voice trembling, said, "I was denied a promotion because they said I didn't fit the company's image." An older man added solemnly, "It always starts small, a cold glance, an innocent joke. But those small things build walls so high you don't even realize you've been pushed out." Avery clenched her hands, each story striking a chord within her. The facilitator turned to her, speaking gently. "Avery, would you like to share anything?" She lifted her gaze, conflict clear in her eyes. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I never thought I was part of the problem, but now it's clear. I believed I was doing the right thing because I followed procedure. But I never stopped to question if that procedure was fair." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "When I asked Imani to leave her seat, I didn't see a person who had paid for it. I saw a problem I needed to fix. And now I understand. The way I viewed her was part of the problem." After the discussion, participants were given reflection forms. One question made Avery freeze. "Think of a time you unknowingly reinforced injustice. What could you have done differently?" The image of Imani leaving first class flashed vividly in her mind, as clear as if it had happened yesterday. She remembered Imani's quiet, hurt expression and the cold efficiency with which she had handled the situation. For the first time, Avery no longer saw herself as a victim. She saw herself as someone complicit in a broken system. She whispered, almost to herself, "Lord, I was wrong. I hurt someone without even realizing it. Please, give me the strength to make it right." The facilitator glanced at her and nodded, sensing the shift within her. As the session ended, Avery stepped outside, feeling both empty and cautiously hopeful. What she had learned couldn't undo the past, but it marked the start of a journey to make amends. For the first time in weeks, she felt less alone. God had shown her a path of repentance and change. As Avery Thompson embarked on a journey of understanding and redemption, Imani Carter stood at a critical crossroads in her life. With the damning evidence provided by her attorney, Jonathan Hale, Imani no longer doubted the systemic injustices embedded within Swift Skies. She had the opportunity to expose the truth. But speaking out came with its own set of risks, hurting others, being exploited by political agendas and throwing herself into the unrelenting storm of public scrutiny. One quiet evening in her apartment, Imani sat across from Jonathan. Spread across the table were internal documents from Swift Skies, undeniable proof of bias and injustice within the system. She ran a hand over her forehead, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Jonathan, if I hold a press conference, I want everything to be clear and truthful. No embellishments, no spin. But I'm afraid, once this comes to light, it might spiral beyond my control." Jonathan nodded, his calm gaze steady with resolve. "I understand your fear, Imani. But you know silence isn't an option. You have the power to do what no one else can, to tell the truth. And that truth, as difficult as it is, has the potential to create real change." Imani turned her eyes toward the window, where the city lights sparkled like distant stars. She whispered, almost to herself, "Lord, I know you've placed me here for a reason. But am I strong enough to carry this responsibility? I'm afraid I can't satisfy everyone." Jonathan sat up straighter, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't need to satisfy everyone. You just need to tell the truth. That's all that matters." Imani sighed, her eyes reflecting the conflict within. After a moment of silence, she nodded. "All right, let's hold the press conference. But Jonathan, I need one condition. I want to make sure that no one, not even Avery, becomes a further target of outrage. People need to understand this isn't about a single individual. This is about an entire system." Jonathan smiled faintly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. He nodded, his voice filled with unwavering support. "Understood, Imani. We'll do it the right way. I'll make sure your message is delivered clearly and fairly." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Jonathan and his team worked tirelessly to organize the press conference, meticulously arranging documents, visuals, and evidence. Imani spent hours practicing in front of a mirror, rehearsing how to deliver her message with clarity and heartfelt conviction. The night before the press conference, Imani's manager visited her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with encouragement. "Imani, you've inspired millions on the basketball court. But this time, you'll inspire them in a different way, by standing up for the truth. No matter what happens, know that you're doing the right thing." Imani offered a faint smile, but within her, a storm of nerves and determination brewed. She knew that tomorrow wouldn't just be a pivotal day for her, but also for everyone who had ever endured injustice. The press conference was held in a sprawling auditorium in the heart of New York City. Reporters, social activists, and supporters crowded the brightly lit space, their murmurs a low hum beneath the glow of camera lights. Imani Carter, who had become the face of a growing justice movement, stood backstage, taking a deep breath to steady herself for what would undoubtedly be the most defining moment of her life. In front of her stood Jonathan Hale, his hand resting on her shoulder, his gaze filled with encouragement. "Imani, remember, you're not just speaking for yourself today. You're speaking for all the people who've never had the chance to be heard. Speak from your heart." Imani nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. But deep inside, she felt the immense weight of what was to come, not fear, but the crushing responsibility of it all. As she stepped onto the stage, the blinding lights of the cameras illuminated her, casting her figure in sharp relief. She exuded quiet confidence, tempered by humility. The murmurs in the room faded to silence as she approached the podium, placing her hands firmly on its edge to steady herself. Imani's gaze swept across the audience, meeting the expectant eyes of hundreds. Her voice, steady and clear, broke the silence. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here today. This isn't an easy press conference, but I know it's a necessary one." She paused briefly, drawing a deep breath before continuing. "We are here today not just because of what happened to me, but because of what it represents. This isn't about me or any one person. This is about a system of injustice that has been allowed to persist for far too long. A system that has forced people like me and so many others to suffer in silence. And today, I've decided I won't stay silent anymore." The relentless clicks of cameras filled the room as the crowd hung on her every word. Imani glanced briefly at the notes in front of her, but then pushed them aside, lifting her head to speak directly from her heart. Her voice grew stronger with every sentence. What happened on that flight wasn't just the mistake of one person. Avery Thompson, the flight attendant who asked me to move, isn't the issue. The real issue is a system that trained and compelled her to act that way. A system that prioritizes certain people based on their appearance while pushing others into the shadows. And that is unacceptable. She paused, her eyes locking onto the nearest camera, as if speaking directly to the millions watching at home. "I'm not here to attack any individual. I'm not here to destroy someone's career. I'm here to demand change. Because justice isn't about revenge. It's about building a future where no one has to endure what I went through." A lone clap broke the silence, quickly followed by a wave of applause that swelled throughout the room. Imani bowed her head briefly in gratitude, and when she raised it again, her eyes blazed with newfound determination. "I can't do this alone," she continued. "We need unity. We need to ask questions. And we need to hold accountable the organizations we trust. God has given me the strength to stand here today, and I believe He sees the change we can create together." She ended her speech with a call to action. It's time for us to demand change. And that change begins with us, by refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice, by asking hard questions, and by insisting on fairness for everyone, no matter who they are. Imani stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause. Reporters clamored for her attention, shouting questions, but she didn't respond immediately. Jonathan walked beside her, a small, satisfied smile on his face. "You did incredible, Imani. I think we just witnessed a turning point," he said. Imani returned his smile, though her heart was heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The press conference was a declaration, but the real fight lay ahead. As she exited the auditorium, sunlight streamed down like a message from above, reassuring her that she was on the right path. That night, Imani Carter sat alone in her living room, the light from her phone blinking incessantly on the table. Messages of support flooded in from fans, sponsors, and human rights organizations alike. "You're an inspiration to millions, Imani. Don't give up. We stand with you. Change needs people like you." Yet amid the encouragement, a deeper, unrelenting question echoed in her mind. Do I have the right to destroy someone's life for the sake of a greater cause? She buried her head in her hands, her eyes fixed on the glowing phone screen where the latest article featured an image of Avery Thompson, the new target of public outrage. Imani let out a long sigh, her gaze turning distant. She rose from the couch and walked to the large window of her apartment. The lights of New York City sparkled as always, but for the first time, Imani felt swallowed by the weight of the expectations surrounding her. She whispered, as if confessing to herself, "God, I've done the right thing, haven't I? But why does doing the right thing feel so awful? I don't want to ruin her life. But if I stop now, will anyone forgive me? Will I forgive myself?" At the Cultural Sensitivity Training Center, Avery Thompson sat silently in the corner of the room, her eyes fixed on the worksheet in front of her. The page bore a list of questions meant to prompt self-reflection on past actions. Think of a situation where you unintentionally or intentionally contributed to injustice. What did you do? How did you feel at the time? How do you feel about it now? Avery picked up her pen, her fingers trembling. She stared at the blank page, but the printed words seemed to wrap around her mind like chains. The memory of that flight surged back, Imani standing up, her cold, silent stare piercing through Avery as she pulled her suitcase and walked to the back of the plane. A crushing weight settled over her, making the air in the room feel stifling. Each breath seemed to grow heavier as the pressure in her chest intensified. The facilitator passed by, pausing briefly at Avery's table. A middle-aged woman with a gentle but firm expression, she leaned down and spoke softly. "Ms. Thompson, take your time. This isn't about right or wrong. It's an opportunity for you to look within and understand what needs to change." Avery nodded slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. After the facilitator moved on, she exhaled shakily, lowered her head, and began to write, each word heavy with the weight of her guilt. "I asked a passenger to leave her seat, even though she had every right to be there. I did it because I thought I was following protocol. But I never stopped to ask myself if that protocol was fair." She paused, staring at the words, then added another line. "I didn't stop to think that I might be hurting someone." It felt as if a boulder had been placed on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She realized that she hadn't just followed orders. She'd had the chance to push back, but chose not to. Later that evening, Avery returned to her small apartment, the weight of her training materials hanging heavily from her shoulder bag. But it wasn't the documents that burdened her. It was the storm of emotions she didn't know how to process. The newspaper she'd left on the table that morning remained untouched. Its front page bore an image of Imani Carter at her press conference, her confident smile a stark reminder of the injustice Avery had helped perpetuate. Picking up the paper, Avery's hands trembled as she flipped through its pages, reading the coverage of Imani's speech. Imani Carter emphasized that this isn't the fault of any one individual, but rather an issue with the entire system. The words echoed in Avery's mind like a dagger twisting in her heart. Instead of feeling relief that she wasn't solely to blame, she felt exposed, as though the world could see right through her. If the problem is the system, she thought bitterly, then why is all the blame falling on me? Avery clenched the paper tightly, anger and guilt mingling in her chest. Anger at being made the scapegoat. Guilt for knowing she had played a part. "I know I was wrong," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But why am I the one who has to bear it all? Why can't anyone see that I was just a part of it too?" In a sudden burst of frustration, she threw the paper onto the table, the sound echoing in the silence of her apartment. Her breathing quickened, and as her emotions overwhelmed her, tears began to stream down her face. Collapsing into a chair, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed, the weight of guilt, anger, and helplessness crashing over her. She felt like both the perpetrator and the victim, trapped in a system she had no power to change, yet forced to carry the consequences of its failures. Elsewhere in the city, Imani Carter sat in her apartment, poring over the internal documents from Swift Skies that Jonathan Hale had provided. One report on the training programs mentioned Avery Thompson by name, noting her participation in cultural sensitivity sessions. Imani stopped reading, her eyes lingering on Avery's name. The image of the woman came back to her, a tense, cold expression as she demanded Imani vacate her seat. At the time, Imani had seen Avery as the problem. Now, she understood Avery was merely a small cog in a much larger, deeply flawed machine. Imani let out a heavy sigh, her thoughts swirling. Can I keep fighting this battle without pushing people like Avery deeper into the abyss? If I speak out more strongly, is there a way to protect them? Or will I just end up hurting more people? In their separate spaces, both women wrestled with complex emotions, one striving for redemption, the other bearing the weight of an impossible choice. Yet neither realized that their paths were destined to cross again, not as adversaries, but as two individuals seeking justice and change in a broken world. The attention surrounding the case had sparked waves of positive change, but it also brought unforeseen dangers to Imani Carter and Avery Thompson. While Swift Skies became a symbol of the fight against systemic injustice, it also drew the ire of extremist groups opposed to any form of progress. That morning, Imani awoke to the sound of her doorbell. She stepped outside, an uneasy feeling creeping over her as she noticed an unmarked envelope placed on her doorstep. The envelope was dark gray, unassuming, but inside was a single piece of paper with crude, red scrawls. Imani Carter, stay silent or see what happens. Imani held the note in her hands, her face calm, but deep down, she felt the sharp undercurrent of tension. The letter was a stark warning. She was being watched. Jonathan, her lawyer, arrived moments later for a scheduled meeting. Imani handed him the note without a word. As Jonathan read it, the color drained from his face. "Imani, we need to call the police immediately," he said, his voice urgent. "This isn't a joke. This is a direct threat to your safety." Imani nodded, her gaze steady. She knew such threats were yet another trial in her journey, a challenge she refused to let intimidate her. "I won't back down," she said firmly. "If they think threats like this will silence me, they're wrong." Across a few city blocks, in her modest apartment, Avery was tidying her desk when a knock at the door startled her. Opening it, she found no one, only an envelope lying on the ground. It looked identical to the one Imani had received, and just touching it sent a chill down Avery's spine. She closed the door, her hands trembling as she opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in jagged, ominous handwriting. "MS. Thompson, we know what you're doing. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Avery's hands began to shake violently, her breathing quickening. They knew where she was. They knew what she was doing. And they could do anything to her at any moment. She sank into her chair, staring at the paper as memories from the past few weeks overwhelmed her. Cold stares, anonymous threats, and now this. "They'll find me. They can do anything," she murmured, her voice breaking. Two reactions. Imani confronts, Avery collapses. Imani calmly contacted Jonathan and the police, ensuring every precaution was taken to protect herself. She also reached out to the security team at the community center where she planned to hold her upcoming speech, requesting additional measures. "This is why I can't stop," she told Jonathan. "If I stay silent, this will keep happening to others. I won't let them control our future with their threats." Avery, meanwhile, spiraled into fear. She didn't dare open her curtains or step outside. She felt like prey, trapped with no escape. That evening, as the dim light in her apartment cast long shadows, Avery sat curled on her sofa, clutching her phone tightly. She wanted to call someone, anyone, but she didn't know what to say. She couldn't call the police. Would they even protect her? And she couldn't contact the training center. They had explicitly told her to avoid drawing attention. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered in desperation, "God, if you're here, please show me a way out of this. I can't do this alone." Both women, in their separate spaces, realized the gravity of these threats. They were more than just words. These were calculated attempts to silence them. But while Imani remained composed, driven by determination to continue her fight, Avery felt cornered, paralyzed by fear, with no clear way to defend herself. Under the shadow of these direct threats, both women began to see the truth. They needed each other, not as adversaries, but as allies in a battle against a broken system and the forces willing to go to any lengths to protect it. In the days following the threatening letter, Imani Carter focused on her next steps. But the warnings didn't stop. They came not only through messages but in more unsettling forms. A strange car parked outside her apartment for hours, and a shadowy figure lingered at a distance as she left the community center. The danger was growing more imminent with each passing day. One morning, while working with Jonathan Hale at his office, Imani received a call from the police. The voice on the other end was calm but grave. "We've discovered an extremist forum on social media discussing both you and another individual connected to the case, Avery Thompson. They appear to be plotting retaliatory actions." Imani set the phone down, her face thoughtful and composed. Jonathan's worried gaze met hers. "Imani, this is the time to think carefully," he said. "The danger isn't just aimed at you. It's targeting everyone involved. If Avery is facing similar threats, she could be our strongest ally." Imani frowned, remaining silent for a moment. She knew Jonathan was right, but reaching out to Avery, once her adversary in this narrative, would not be easy. "Do you think she'll even listen?" Imani asked, skepticism heavy in her voice. Jonathan nodded slightly. "She's under pressure too, from the public, from these extremists, and from her own guilt. I believe if you give her the chance, she'll understand that both of you are fighting the same system." Imani sighed, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But then she nodded, her resolve returning. "Fine. Set up the meeting. We need to talk." Avery under siege. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Avery Thompson had spent the week in a state of near paralysis. The threatening letters, anonymous calls, and unwanted attention from extremist groups had left her too afraid to leave her home. One evening, as she reread notes from her cultural sensitivity training, her phone rang. It was a call from the training center, and the facilitator's voice on the line was filled with concern. "Avery, the police just informed us that an extremist group is targeting both you and Imani Carter. We recommend that you seek legal or personal security support immediately." Avery felt the air in the room thicken as dread closed in around her. She sank into her chair, her voice trembling as she muttered to herself, "They really want to destroy me, but I was just following orders. Why me?" A sudden knock at the door made her jump. She hesitated before opening it slightly, only to see a courier handing her an envelope before hurrying away. Inside was yet another ominous note. "You betrayed the system. We will make you pay." Tears streamed down her face as Avery felt herself inching closer to the edge. But as her eyes landed on an online article featuring Imani Carter, an unexpected thought crossed her mind. Maybe she's the only one who could understand this. Maybe she's the only person who can help me. The next day, as Avery struggled to focus during another training session, her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakably composed and formal. "Avery Thompson?" Jonathan Hale's voice carried a tone of seriousness tinged with civility. "This is Jonathan Hale, Imani Carter's attorney. We need to meet with you to discuss the shared danger both of you are facing." Avery froze, a mixture of surprise and unease washing over her. "She wants to meet me? Why? I thought she wants to make it clear that this is no longer about the two of you." Jonathan interrupted. "This is about a system and the people who are fighting to protect it. We can't move forward without your cooperation." Avery hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Finally, she exhaled and said quietly, "All right, arrange it." Imani stood in Jonathan's office, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She wasn't sure what to expect when she saw Avery for the first time since everything had unfolded. But she knew this meeting was a necessary step toward confronting the shared threat they faced. When the door opened, Avery entered, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes shadowed with apprehension. Imani studied her, emotions churning within. The woman who had forced her out of her first-class seat now looked like another victim of the same system that had created the situation in the first place. Both women sat down, facing each other across the table. A long, heavy silence filled the space as neither seemed to know how to begin. Finally, Imani broke the silence, her voice low but firm. "I don't trust you, but I know we have to do this together." Avery lifted her head, her eyes glistening with guilt and determination. "I know I was wrong, but this time, I want to do the right thing." The meeting, fraught with tension and reluctance, laid the foundation for an uneasy alliance between the two women, each realizing that to face the danger ahead, they had to stand together. Imani Carter and Avery Thompson sat across from each other in the small conference room of Jonathan Hale's law office. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken words. They were two opposites, tethered together by a fragile thread called shared danger. Imani's gaze was sharp and unyielding, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Avery sat hunched, her hands fidgeting nervously. Jonathan, seated between them, attempted to diffuse the suffocating atmosphere with his calm and professional tone. "You both know why we're here today. The extremist group has targeted both of you. But more than that, they're trying to defend a system that has entangled you both, a system that must be dismantled. And to do that, we need you to work together." Imani's eyes locked onto Avery, her expression a mix of distrust and simmering anger. "Let me be clear, I don't trust you. I can't forget what you did to me on that flight. You didn't just hurt me personally, you embodied everything wrong with that moment." Avery raised her head, her eyes trembling slightly but steady. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice soft but resolute. "I know. And I don't expect you to trust me, not yet. I understand trust isn't restored with just an apology. But I need you to know that I'm trying to make amends. I can't undo the past, but this time, I want to do what's right. I hope God will give me the strength to do that." Imani leaned forward, her piercing gaze seeming to dig into Avery's soul. "And how exactly do you plan to do what's right this time? By running away and letting others bear the consequences for you, like you did before? Or by justifying yourself while others pay for your actions?" Avery bit her lip, pain flashing across her face. But instead of retreating, she clasped her hands tightly, as if silently praying for courage, and responded in a voice trembling but determined. "I was scared. I still am. But if I keep running, I'll always be part of the problem. I don't want that anymore. God teaches us that the truth will set us free, and I want to believe that." Jonathan interjected, his tone steady and firm. "Imani, I understand why you don't trust Avery. But we're facing a much bigger enemy, a system that has victimized both of you in different ways. Imani, you can't fight this alone. And Avery, you have the chance to make things right, not just for yourself, but for everyone harmed by this system. This isn't about your past. It's about what you're willing to do moving forward. So the question is, are you both ready to work together?" Imani exhaled deeply, leaning back in her chair. Her eyes reflected weariness, but also a glimmer of resolve. She stayed silent for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice low but firm. "Fine. We'll work together. But let's be clear. I'm not here to forgive or cover for anyone. I'm here because this is bigger than me and bigger than you. We don't have another choice if we want real change." Avery nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. Her voice was quiet but resolute. "Thank you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know that doesn't come easily. I just want to help in whatever way I can. I've prayed for a chance to make things right, and I believe this is it." Jonathan placed a detailed plan on the table, his tone shifting to a more practical one. The first step is aligning your message. We'll hold a press conference. Imani, you'll represent the affected community, sharing your story to show this isn't just a personal issue. Avery, you'll speak from the perspective of someone who was a tool of the system, acknowledging your mistakes and calling for change. That's how we can shift the focus to the real problem and reduce the tension. Imani raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp but serious. And what exactly is she going to say? That she didn't realize she was part of the problem until she got caught? Avery looked directly at Imani, her voice small but steady. I'll say that I was wrong. That I hurt people without realizing it. That I unknowingly enabled an unjust system. And that I'm here to make amends, not excuses. Imani stared at Avery, searching her expression for any trace of sincerity. After a long pause, she gave a slight nod, her tone calm but firm. Fine, but don't let me down. This isn't about you or me, it's about everyone we can help. The meeting ended with a clear plan. As Imani prepared to leave, Avery hesitated, her voice trembling but earnest. Ms. Carter, may I say something? Imani turned, her gaze still guarded but softer than before. What is it? Avery bowed her head slightly, her hands clasped tightly together as if holding on to her last shred of faith. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I want to thank you for giving me this chance. I know I'm not worthy of trust, but I promise I'll do everything I can not to let you down. I believe God put us in this situation to teach us how to overcome and create change. Imani studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, her voice softened slightly, though her tone remained serious. Thanking me doesn't mean anything unless you follow through. I don't care what you say now, I care about what you do next. That's how you prove yourself. A faint smile crossed Avery's face, fragile but hopeful. The two women walked out of Jonathan's office, the late afternoon sunlight casting a golden hue over the quiet streets. They still didn't fully trust each other, but for the first time, they shared a common goal: to confront the threats and expose the truth. Imani silently prayed, God, guide us. The road ahead is long, but I believe you've placed us here for a reason. Walking beside her, Avery whispered softly, Lord, help me keep my promise. I can't do this alone. Under the fading light of the day, they both knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But now, they had each other, not as enemies, but as reluctant allies in the fight for justice. Under the dim light of the afternoon, Imani Carter and Avery Thompson left Jonathan Hale's office, each carrying a different weight on their shoulders. Imani felt the heavy burden of hope placed on her by those who supported her, while Avery wrestled with her own fears, questioning whether she had the courage to do what was right. As they walked down the long hallway, Imani turned to Avery. You said you wanted to make things right, but words don't mean anything without action. Don't just say it, prove it. Avery stopped, her eyes slowly hardening with determination. Imani's words weren't just pressure. They were a deep reminder that she now stood at the edge of a chance to rebuild her life. You're right, Avery replied, her voice small but resolute. I can't just apologize. I need to do more. That evening, in her small apartment, Avery Thompson sat on an old, worn-out chair, the room illuminated by the pale yellow glow of a single desk lamp. Before her lay a stack of documents she had unearthed during her time at Swift Skies. On the first page, the bold letters stared back at her. Priority Level 1 Customer Guidelines. The words on the paper felt like knives cutting into her conscience. She remembered reading these directives countless times without a second thought, seeing them as nothing more than routine parts of her job. Back then, she had never stopped to question their true meaning. Priority Level 1. a seemingly innocuous phrase, now laden with a weight she couldn't ignore. Avery gripped the papers tightly, her fingers turning white as her breath grew heavy. It felt as if the entire world was pressing down on her shoulders. Memories from the past, the time she had turned a blind eye to injustice to protect her own position, crashed over her like an unrelenting wave. That night, sleep evaded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Imani Carter, her cold, pained expression from that fateful day on the flight, the day she was forced to leave her first-class seat. "What have I done?" Avery murmured to herself. "How did I live with this for so many years?" She bolted upright, walking into the bathroom. She turned on the light and stood before the mirror. The harsh brightness revealed the dark circles under her eyes, the toll of sleepless nights etched into her face. "Avery, are you sure about this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. She placed her hands on the sink, staring at her reflection. "Once you release these documents, everything will change. You'll lose your safety, your stability, maybe even your life." She gazed into her own eyes, searching for a shred of courage. But all she saw was a woman who had once been indifferent to injustice, who had stepped over the pain of others to preserve her own comfort. Her voice trembled as she whispered, almost as if praying, "God, if this is the path you've chosen for me, please give me the strength to follow it. I don't know if I can do this, but I can't keep turning away from the truth. Please guide me." The next morning, Avery sat at her old computer. Her hands shook as she opened her email inbox, each click feeling as heavy as 1,000 pounds. On the screen before her was a draft email, ready to be sent, one button away from changing everything. She read over her words one last time. "To whom it may concern, I am Avery Thompson, a former employee of Swift Skies. I am in possession of internal documents related to their customer prioritization policies, documents that expose a covert system of discrimination. I am willing to answer any questions and provide all necessary information." Her eyes fixed on the send button, her mind racing with one last thought. "I could stop this. I could forget everything and go on living a quiet life. But is that what God wants me to do?" Avery drew a deep, trembling breath. Then, with a final surge of resolve, she pressed send. The email was gone, and with it, any chance of turning back. She slumped into her chair, the glow of the computer screen casting faint light across her weary face. A strange calm settled over her, mingled with the weight of what she had just done. She whispered softly, as if to reassure herself, "I've done the right thing. God will be with me, no matter what happens." News of Swift Skies' internal documents spread like wildfire, creating a media storm across social platforms and major news outlets. Avery Thompson, a name once associated with an anonymous flight attendant, was now at the center of polarizing public opinion. To defenders of the old system, Avery was a traitor, a whistleblower who had shattered their carefully constructed facade of loyalty to expose truths they had desperately tried to hide. But to those demanding justice, she was a quiet hero, rebel brave enough to stand against what was wrong, despite the inevitable cost. When Imani Carter came across the headlines, her heart grew heavy with a mix of emotions. She had doubted Avery before, believing her apologies and efforts were nothing more than attempts to escape accountability. But this time, she knew Avery's actions weren't a calculated move. They were a true declaration of war against an unjust system. Imani set her phone down, her gaze distant. After a moment of silence, she turned to Jonathan Hale, seated across from her with a stack of documents in his hands. "She actually did it," Imani said, her tone a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "I didn't think she'd have the courage to step into the light." Jonathan nodded, his expression reflecting a deep understanding. Perhaps she's trying to atone, not just to you, but to herself. I think she's searching for redemption. Imani met Jonathan's eyes, her own filled with quiet contemplation. Redemption. The word brought her back to Avery's whispered prayers during their first meeting. Could it be that, somehow, Avery had found the strength in her faith to do the right thing? Maybe, Imani murmured, her voice soft but resolute. But she can't do this alone. We need to speak out. A few days later, at a press conference organized by Imani's legal team, hundreds of eyes from reporters, activists, and the public were fixed on her every move. Imani stepped up to the podium with the calm confidence she had honed over the years, though the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than ever. She gripped the microphone, letting her eyes sweep over the crowd before drawing a deep breath. Her voice rang out, clear and unwavering. Avery Thompson is not the enemy. She has done something Swift Skies refused to do: admit the injustice in their system. What she has done is not for personal gain, but to expose a truth that has been hidden for far too long. Imani paused, letting her words sink in. Her gaze softened, shifting from stern resolve to deep emotion. She knew these words were not just a defense of Avery. They were a powerful message to those watching. We don't need a scapegoat to blame. We need change. And that change starts with acknowledging that this system is broken. It starts with coming together to fix what's been destroyed. Avery has done the right thing, and I stand here today to say she is not our enemy. The sound of camera shutters echoed through the room, capturing every word, every flicker of emotion on her face. But Imani's voice remained steady, her tone resolute. This fight is not about pointing fingers at individuals. It's about dismantling a system that has pitted us against one another. We must break it down. And that can only happen if we stop looking for someone to blame and start working towards solutions. When her speech ended, a wave of applause rippled through the room. Though it wasn't thunderous, it carried a sense of agreement and hope. Supporters of Imani and Avery felt a step forward had been taken, but they also understood the battle ahead would be long and arduous. As Imani stepped off the podium, Jonathan approached her, holding his phone with a new message displayed. He smiled softly as he handed it to her. "What does she say?" Imani asked, her tone a blend of curiosity and concern. Jonathan read the message from Avery aloud, each word resonating like a promise. "I'm ready for whatever comes next. Thank you for believing in me." Imani nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting both determination and resolve. "Then we keep fighting. None of us are backing down." Jonathan looked at Imani with admiration shining in his eyes. "You're not just standing up for yourself, you're standing up for everyone who can't. I believe, with your leadership, we'll do what's right." Imani responded, her voice low but imbued with meaning. "This isn't about me or Avery. It's about changing a system so no one else has to suffer like this again." In that moment, both Imani and Jonathan understood that, despite the challenges ahead, they had found allies in one another and a shared purpose, a future where justice and equality could prevail. The revelations from Avery Thompson's disclosure of Swift Skies' internal documents and Imani Carter's defense of her at the press conference ignited a storm of public opinion. Supporters hailed it as a significant step toward exposing injustice, while detractors condemned it as destructive and an unforgivable betrayal. In the days following the press conference, the media was relentless, with headlines like "Hero or Traitor" and "A Broken System Exposed" plastered across newspapers and social media. Yet, with the attention came increasingly dangerous threats. One morning, as Imani scrolled through social media responses, her phone buzzed with a call from her manager. "Imani," her manager began, his tone a mix of excitement and caution. NBC has invited you and Avery to participate in a live interview next week. They want both of you to sit down together to discuss everything. Imani frowned, a swirl of emotions rising within her. They want me and Avery to appear together. Yes, her manager confirmed. They believe it's a powerful opportunity to amplify your message. But I understand if you're not comfortable with the idea. Imani was silent for a few moments, her gaze fixed on the window, where the pale morning light filtered into the room. She thought of Avery's eyes at the press conference, filled with determination but also fear. "All right," she said firmly. "I'll do it, but I want to make sure this doesn't turn into a personal attack or a cheap spectacle." "I'll make sure of that," her manager promised, relief evident in his voice. "And I think Avery will agree as well. This is a chance for both of you to deliver a strong, united message." At the same time, in her small apartment, Avery received a similar call from the network. When she heard the suggestion of appearing alongside Imani in a live interview, her hands trembled slightly. "A live interview?" she repeated, her voice tinged with anxiety. "And Imani, she's already agreed?" "Yes," the representative confirmed. "We believe having both of you together will have a greater impact. This is also a chance for you to clarify your actions." Avery took a deep breath, her mind racing with questions. Did Imani truly trust her? Would she have the courage to face the public again? "All right," she said after a brief pause. "I'll do it. But please make sure it's fair to both of us. I don't want this to turn into a battle. We're committed to being honest and fair," the representative assured her. As the call ended, Avery sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by a mix of anxiety and determination. Deep down, she knew this was her opportunity to atone, not just to Imani, but also to herself. The day before the interview, Imani and Avery met at the studio for preparations. The tension in the room was palpable, their unease etched across their faces. Imani approached first, her gaze sharp but no longer hostile. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked calmly. Avery looked up, her eyes flickering with both apprehension and resolve. "I don't think I'll ever truly feel ready," she admitted, "but I know I have to do this." "And you?" Imani nodded, her arms crossed over her chest. "We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it to expose the truth. Remember that, Avery. Everything we say will have a ripple effect far beyond us." Avery bit her lip, then nodded, a glimmer of newfound resolve in her eyes. "I know. And I promise, I won't let you down." The two women stood in silence for a moment, as if searching for mutual understanding, a tacit reassurance that couldn't be spoken aloud. Though caution lingered, a fragile but growing sense of solidarity began to take root between them. The bright studio lights illuminated the faces of Imani Carter and Avery Thompson as they sat across from the host. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, as though everyone present was holding their breath, waiting for a confession or an emotional reckoning. The host, a poised, middle-aged woman with a warm yet piercing demeanor, offered a faint smile to ease the strain. "Today, we're here to hear the story of two women who dared to confront injustice. My first question is this: how do you both feel after everything that's happened?" Avery took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of her chair as though seeking stability in this daunting moment. Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but as she glanced at Imani, she found a fragment of courage to speak her truth. "I don't know where to begin," Avery said, her voice soft but steady enough to carry through the room. "For so long, I believed I was doing the right thing, that following protocol was all that mattered. I never thought about the consequences of those actions for others, nor did I question whether those protocols were truly just. She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor as if confronting her inner judgment. Memories of her past decisions, of the times she turned a blind eye to wrongdoing, washed over her like relentless waves. But the truth is, I was wrong. She continued, her voice trembling yet sincere. I failed to see the harm I caused. I let fear and complacency blind me. And now, I ask God for forgiveness for my blindness. I ask forgiveness not only from God but from everyone who has been hurt by my actions. Turning to Imani, tears glistening in her eyes but unwavering, she added, Imani, I want to say that I am deeply sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for every time I stayed silent in the face of what was wrong. I don't expect your forgiveness right away, but I pray that God gives me the strength to right the wrongs I've caused. Imani sat in silence, absorbing every word. Her sharp gaze softened slightly, revealing a flicker of understanding. She drew in a deep breath before speaking, her voice firm yet composed. When everything happened, I was furious, she began, her eyes shifting toward the audience. I wasn't just angry at what you did to me, but at the system that allowed it to happen. I kept asking myself, how do we let injustices like this continue over and over again? She turned to Avery, her tone gentler but still resolute. I thought you were my enemy, Avery. But I realized you were a victim too. A victim of ignorance, of a system that forced us into opposing roles. I prayed long and hard for clarity, and I came to understand that we don't have to be enemies. We need to stand together to bring change. Imani nodded slightly, her voice growing stronger. I accept your apology. Not because it can erase the past, but because I believe God brought us here to do what is right. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about starting over with sincerity and a commitment to change. The host leaned forward, her tone more reflective now. You've both come a long way to be here today. But I have to ask, what made you decide to collaborate instead of keeping your distance? Imani was the first to respond, her voice clear and unwavering. I realized that to change a system, we can't do it alone. I prayed for God to guide me, and I believe working with Avery is part of that plan. If I want to demand justice, I must also be willing to forgive and work with those who are committed to change. Avery is one of those people. Avery glanced at Imani, offering a small, grateful smile before adding in a voice laced with emotion. I chose to work with Imani not because I think I deserve forgiveness, but because I know it's what God wants me to do. I believe He brought us here to share a greater message, that forgiveness and genuine action can transform everything. And I hope my actions show that I'm striving to do what's right. As the interview drew to a close, the host posed one final question. What message would you like to share with those watching? Avery answered first, her gaze locked onto the camera. I want to say that silence is never the answer. I've learned that through my mistakes. And I ask anyone who feels afraid to pray, to seek guidance from God, and to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Imani followed, her voice gentle but resolute. I want people to know that change doesn't come from revenge or blame. It comes from understanding, forgiveness, and action. We may not be perfect, but as God teaches us, we always have the chance to correct our mistakes and do what's right. I hope everyone finds the strength to keep trying. In that moment, Imani and Avery's eyes met. There was no trace of suspicion or hostility, only shared empathy and a belief that they were fulfilling a purpose greater than themselves. The interview ended with applause from the audience. But for Imani and Avery, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new journey under the light of truth and faith. The news of the class action lawsuit against Swift Skies dominated headlines, the scrolling banners on every major network proclaiming, Swift Skies faces the largest discrimination lawsuit in aviation history. Outside the airline's headquarters, hundreds of protesters gathered, hoisting signs that bore powerful slogans. Justice for all. In the injustice now, in the midst of the crowd, a young reporter gripped her microphone tightly, weaving through the noise to interview demonstrators. One of them, Mrs. Margaret, an elderly woman with tears brimming in her eyes, shared her story with the camera. They treated me like I didn't exist. They forced me to the back of the plane, even though I'd paid for first class. I thought it was just bad luck, but now I realize I wasn't alone. What I went through wasn't an accident, it was the system. The reporter leaned in, her tone both gentle and probing. Mrs. Margaret, what do you hope this lawsuit will achieve? Clutching her sign tighter, Margaret's eyes burned with resolve. I pray that God gives us the strength to see this through. This isn't just about me. It's about hundreds, thousands of others who've been treated unfairly. We want justice, and we won't stop until we get it. In the courtroom. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable as one victim after another took the stand, their trembling voices telling stories of humiliation and unfairness. Each testimony painted a harrowing picture of systemic discrimination. One man, middle-aged and visibly weary, but with a fire of determination in his eyes, recounted his ordeal. I worked hard my entire life to afford a first-class ticket for my first vacation. But when I got to the gate, they told me my ticket wasn't valid and forced me to sit in economy. They didn't even give me a proper explanation. The plaintiff's lawyer rose, his voice commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Your Honor, these stories aren't just about minor inconveniences. They are undeniable proof of a system that prioritizes some while marginalizing others. We're here today to ensure no one ever has to endure this again. At the back of the courtroom, Imani Carter and Avery Thompson sat side by side, silently taking in every word. Imani clenched her fists, her heart heavy as she heard stories echoing her own painful experience. She turned to Avery, her voice low but filled with emotion. They're standing up not just for themselves, but for people like me and you. We can't let them down. Avery nodded, her voice trembling but resolute. I know. And I'm ready to take full responsibility if it helps them achieve justice. In the Swift Skies boardroom. Meanwhile, inside Swift Skies corporate headquarters, chaos reigned. The executive board convened in an emergency meeting, the faces around the table painted with worry. We're losing all our major sponsors, the CFO said, his voice taut with anxiety. Our stock has plummeted 40% in just a week. If this continues, we won't survive. The CEO, a haggard-looking man, interjected sharply. We need a reform plan immediately. If we don't act, Swift Skies won't just lose its reputation, it'll cease to exist. A breaking news segment aired on television screens across the country, intensifying the pressure. The reporter's voice was grave as she read the report. Once a proud symbol of aviation excellence, Swift Skies now finds itself at the center of unprecedented criticism. The very system they once celebrated has been exposed as deeply flawed and discriminatory. The question now isn't whether they can fix it, but whether they can survive it. The broadcast headline scrolled ominously. Swift Skies, from heights of glory to depths of scandal. In the conference room, a PR director leaned forward and whispered with measured urgency. There's only one way to save ourselves. We need to collaborate with people like Carter and Thompson to rebuild public trust. The media, the courts, and the public, all eyes were fixed on Swift Skies. Amid the chaos, however, a glimmer of hope emerged. A hope not just for the redemption of one airline, but for the transformation of an entire system that had long been shrouded in darkness. A week later, in a grand hall at the New York Convention Center, Imani Carter and Avery Thompson stepped onto the stage to the thunderous applause of the audience. The lights from hundreds of cameras and spotlights illuminated their commanding presence. No longer merely figures in a shocking story, they had become symbols of change and the relentless fight for justice. Imani stood tall, her presence commanding yet deeply human. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was clear and resolute. Today, we are not here to dwell on the mistakes of the past. We are here to talk about the changes we can make for the future. This is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new journey. A journey that requires all of us to walk together. Her words hung in the air as she swept her gaze across the audience, meeting eyes filled with hope and expectation. I used to believe that change was something external, she continued, her voice softening. That if we exposed injustice, the system would fix itself. But I've come to realize that true change starts from within. It begins with the courage of individuals willing to stand up and do what's right, no matter how hard it may be. Turning to Avery, Imani allowed herself a small, encouraging smile before continuing. Today, I stand not just as a representative for those who've been wronged, but also to acknowledge those who've had the courage to admit their mistakes and make amends. Because in the end, we need more than truth, we need reconciliation. Imani stepped back, yielding the stage to Avery. Slowly, Avery moved forward, her shoulders slightly hunched in a gesture of humility. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice trembling but her eyes steadfast. In the past weeks, I've learned that change cannot come from silence or complacency. For too long, I lived in a state of denial, believing that following the rules was enough. But I was wrong. And while I can't undo the harm I've caused, I can promise to do everything in my power to ensure that no one else has to endure what so many have endured. Her voice strengthened as she continued. Swift Skies was wrong, and so was I. But both Swift Skies and I are committed to building an aviation industry that is fair and inclusive. I hope this journey brings justice to those who've suffered and restores faith that we, as a society, can do better together. A moment of reconciliation. As Avery stepped back, the room erupted into applause, loud and heartfelt, resonating with a collective sense of purpose. Yet both Imani and Avery remained composed, knowing this moment marked only a milestone, not the conclusion of their journey. Imani turned to Avery, her expression a mix of warmth and scrutiny. Placing a hand on Avery's shoulder, she spoke quietly but firmly. Thank you for stepping up. This wasn't easy, but you did it. And together, we did what was right. Avery looked back at Imani, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears and newfound determination. Her voice wavered as she replied, Because of you, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I prayed every day for the courage to face the truth, and I believe God has guided me here. Imani smiled faintly, nodding. Her voice was soft but carried a weight of conviction. He always has a plan. We just have to trust him and follow the path he lays before us. A new beginning. As the event came to a close and the stage lights dimmed, Imani and Avery walked out of the hall together, shoulder to shoulder, like allies embarking on a shared mission. They found themselves on the rooftop of the building, where the golden hues of a New York sunset bathed the city below. The tranquil glow of dusk seemed to mirror the quiet resolve within them. Avery broke the silence, her voice tentative but earnest. Do you think we can really change things? A system this big, do we even stand a chance? Imani turned to her, her eyes gleaming with unwavering hope. I don't believe we can do it alone. But with God's guidance and the perseverance of everyone committed to this cause, nothing is impossible. A faint smile graced Avery's lips as she nodded, her own resolve shining through. I think you're right, and I'll keep praying for the strength to stay the course. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, an unspoken promise binding them together. No longer adversaries, they were now partners in a fight much greater than themselves. As the light of day faded, they walked forward, carrying not just their own stories but the torch of justice and reconciliation, ready to illuminate the path for others to follow. The headquarters of Swift Skies, once shrouded in the gloom of crisis, now gleamed with a fresh, revitalized facade. The glass walls reflected the brilliant sunlight, a symbol of a new beginning. Campaign posters were displayed prominently, bearing the bold slogan, "Fly with justice, together we soar." The VIP lounge, previously criticized as a symbol of exclusion, was now adorned with images of passengers of diverse races, genders, and ages. At the center of the room, a poignant inscription commanded attention. "Everyone deserves to feel welcome, for we are all God's children." During a ceremony to introduce the new training programs, the interim CEO stood at the podium, his eyes shining with determination. His voice echoed throughout the packed room. Swift Skies is no longer the airline it once was. We have changed, not just to correct past mistakes, but to set a standard for the entire aviation industry. With faith in God and in ourselves, we can create a better future. Among the crowd, a young employee with a radiant face spoke to a reporter. His voice brimmed with pride. "I feel lucky to work here at this time. Swift Skies isn't just my workplace. It's where I've learned how to live, how to treat everyone fairly, as God teaches us." Television broadcasts showcased the inclusion and cultural sensitivity training sessions, offering a glimpse of hope. In a brightly lit room, employees engaged in spirited discussions. A young flight attendant stood up, her voice trembling but resolute. "What we're learning today doesn't just help us work better, it helps us live better. I believe God brought us here to learn how to love and respect one another, no matter our differences." In a conference room at Swift Skies, Avery Thompson entered, her gaze steady yet touched with emotion. The room was filled with new employees, each carrying their own stories and backgrounds. Standing before them, Avery offered a soft smile before speaking. "Hello, everyone. I know we come here with different stories, but I believe we all share a common goal, to build a place where everyone feels respected. A place where anyone can walk in, not just as passengers, but as part of our family." For a moment, silence filled the room before it erupted in a wave of applause, an audible affirmation of shared purpose. As the newly appointed head of inclusion and diversity, Avery went beyond organizing training sessions. She spent time listening to personal stories, accepting candid feedback, and embracing even the harshest critiques. Whenever an employee voiced a dissenting opinion, she would respond with a gentle smile and a calm voice. "Thank you for your honesty. The truth can be hard to hear, but it's the only way we can change. And I believe God guides us even when the path is difficult." In a special meeting, a young employee bravely asked, "Ms. Thompson, how did you overcome your past to stand here today?" The room fell silent. Avery paused for a few moments, her eyes sweeping the crowd before looking down at her tightly clasped hands. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice low yet charged with emotion. "It wasn't easy. There were countless nights when I couldn't sleep, haunted by what I had done and the mistakes I had made. But I learned to face them, step by step, through prayer each day. I asked God to grant me the courage not to run away but to stand firm and rebuild what I had broken." She looked around the room, her voice steady but heartfelt. "If I let my mistakes define me, I would never have the chance to fix them. God gave me this opportunity, and I know I can't waste it." She smiled, a soft yet genuine expression. "And now, I want to dedicate the rest of my career to ensuring no one has to experience what I did, or what I caused others to endure. We're here to do what's right, and I believe God will guide us along the way." Meanwhile, Imani Carter embarked on a meaningful new chapter in her life. The Fairness Light Foundation, a charitable organization she founded, was officially launched with the mission of supporting education and raising awareness about inequities in service industries, particularly those prone to discrimination. At a grand scholarship award ceremony held in a brightly lit auditorium, Imani stood on stage, holding an oversized ceremonial check as she handed it to a representative from a local school. Dressed in an elegant white ensemble, she radiated confidence tempered by heartfelt emotion. Her voice rang out, clear and resonant, yet infused with sincerity. This is not just money. This is hope. Hope that each of us has the opportunity to achieve our dreams, no matter our background or the color of our skin. I believe education is the key to breaking the barriers that have existed in our society for far too long. And today, I want to tell you all this. Together, we can make a difference. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience, her eyes glistening with emotion. God has blessed me with the opportunity to stand here today, and I want to use that opportunity to help others. Remember, we are never alone. God is always with us, guiding us through every challenge. After the ceremony, Imani stayed behind to mingle with the attendees. A petite girl with neatly braided hair approached her hesitantly, her eyes sparkling with admiration. The girl lingered for a moment before summoning the courage to speak. "Miss Imani, I want to be just like you. I want to change the world." Imani knelt to meet the girl's gaze, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her smile was warm and encouraging. "You absolutely can, and I believe you will. But you know, changing the world doesn't mean starting with something big right away. Every great change begins with a small step. Stay determined, keep praying, and never stop trying. God will guide you as long as you have faith." The girl smiled back, her eyes now filled with determination. "How do you think I should start?" Imani held her hand gently, speaking softly yet with profound conviction. "Start by loving those around you, respecting their differences, and always striving to learn. Remember, God has given you a strong and kind heart. All you need to do is use it to bring goodness into the world." Swift skies, once teetering on the brink of collapse, had transformed into a beacon of reform and renewal. Slogans like "Fairness on every flight" were displayed prominently, from office walls to international airports, serving as a steadfast pledge to fairness and inclusion. Imani and Avery, who had once stood on opposite sides of a bitter conflict, were now symbols of reconciliation. At a major conference on equity and diversity, they stood together on stage, sharing their journey with hundreds of attendees. Imani spoke first, her voice brimming with emotion yet unwavering in resolve. "We once stood on opposite sides of a conflict, but that didn't stop us from moving forward together. Our story is not just a lesson in mistakes and redemption. It's proof of the power of forgiveness, courage, and faith in a brighter future." Avery followed, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I used to think my mistakes would forever define who I was. But through forgiveness and faith, I've learned that everyone has the chance to make things right and do what's good. I believe that, with faith in God and in one another, we can build a better world." The conference concluded with thunderous applause, but the legacy of Imani and Avery extended far beyond their words. It lay in their actions and steadfast determination to change the world. Late at night, in her small apartment, Avery Thompson sat on the sofa, the soft golden glow of a table lamp illuminating her. She was scrolling through training program documents when the doorbell rang. She walked over and found an unaddressed envelope placed neatly on her doorstep. Avery picked it up, a chill running down her spine. She sat back down, carefully opening the envelope with scissors. Inside was a small piece of paper, the handwriting uneven and hurried. "He's the one behind it all. He never relinquished his grip on power." Avery held her breath, her eyes fixed on the words. Her hands trembled as she turned the envelope over, searching for more clues. There was nothing. She sat motionless for a long moment, her gaze distant as she tried to unravel the message's meaning. Clutching the note tightly, she felt a storm of emotions churn within her. The face of Swift Sky's former CEO flashed in her mind, the man who had led the company before being forced to resign amid scandal. Discriminatory decisions, shadowy policies. It all now seemed like fragments of a larger, darker puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. Her phone sat on the table, its screen glowing with a notification. Her hand hovered over it, but then retreated, her eyes filled with contemplation. If I speak out, what will happen? Will the truth change anything, or will it just make everything worse? Avery took a deep breath and stood. She walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights shimmering in the night. In her mind, a question echoed. Dear God, what do you want me to do? I was wrong to stay silent once. But if I speak now, can I bear the consequences? The next morning, she decided to take a walk. The sky was gray, and light raindrops brushed against her hair and shoulders. She strolled slowly down the street, her shoes crunching softly against the wet pavement. With each step, the questions in her mind multiplied. If I give this letter to Imani, will she believe me? Will anyone believe me? Or will they think this is just a way to cover up my past mistakes? She stopped in front of a small cafe. Through the glass window, she saw a group of young employees laughing together, perhaps the new recruits at Swift Skies. Their bright smiles reminded her of the responsibility she carried, building a place where everyone felt safe and valued. She moved on, her heart heavy. An inner dialogue unfolded in her mind. I stayed silent before. That silence made me part of the problem. But do I have the strength to fight again? Do I have the courage to face the truth, even if it shatters everything I've worked so hard to rebuild? Back in her apartment, Avery stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, not the strong, resolute woman she wanted to see, but someone caught between fear and duty. Looking into her own eyes, she whispered, I can't change the past, but I can choose the present. If I'm afraid, who will stand up? If I'm silent, who will protect the others? She sighed, the determination in her gaze slowly returning. I've prayed for guidance, and maybe this is the answer. God is here, and He won't let me walk this path alone. Avery picked up the letter again, reading every word carefully. This time, instead of fear, she felt a surge of something stronger, determination. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she stopped at Imani's name. The phone rang. When Imani answered, her voice was warm yet curious. Avery? Is everything okay? Avery took a deep breath before responding. Imani, I need to see you right away. I've received something I think you need to see. It's connected to everything we've been fighting for. There was a brief silence on the other end before Imani replied, her tone resolute. All right, let's meet at Jonathan's office this afternoon. We'll go through it together. As the call ended, Avery sat back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the letter once more. She knew her decision would not come without challenges, but this time, she was ready to face the consequences. If this is the truth, I cannot remain silent. God has shown me the way, and I must follow it. Outside her window, the sun began to break through the thick clouds, a sign of hope and renewal. Avery stood, ready for a new battle, perhaps the final one, to bring the truth to light. In the days that followed, news of the anonymous letter unleashed a storm in the public sphere. With the support of Imani and Jonathan, Avery decided to reveal everything in a major press conference. The new documents and evidence pushed the case to an international level, forcing the attention of major organizations and the global aviation industry. Swift Skies was no longer just an airline story. It became a symbol of the urgent need for systemic reform in global services. After a series of high-level meetings with leaders and human rights organizations, Avery was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Global Summit on Diversity and Equity, an event attended by thousands of experts, activists, and leaders from around the world. In a preparation room backstage, Avery stood before a mirror, adjusting the microphone clip to her lapel. She took a deep breath, the words of her familiar prayer echoing in her mind. "Lord, you have brought me here. Please grant me the wisdom and courage to speak the truth, not for myself, but for all those waiting for change." The door opened, and a staff member stepped in. "Ms. Thompson, it's time." Avery nodded, her gaze firm with resolve. She walked down the long hallway leading to the stage, where the lights blazed bright and the sound of applause thundered in anticipation. From the wings, she saw Imani seated in the front row, her eyes filled with trust and encouragement. Avery smiled, stepped onto the stage, and prepared to share her story, a story that would inspire a new generation to fight for justice and truth. The grand hall glowed under the brilliance of the stage lights, every seat filled with attentive faces. Above the stage, the conference banner stood out boldly. Global Summit on Diversity and Equity, our future begins today. Avery Thompson stood at the center of the stage, the light illuminating her face, highlighting eyes filled with resolve and lips pressed together as if bracing for an important declaration. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the audience before she began to speak. "We are here today not just to discuss the wrongs of the past, but to focus on what we can do to make them right. I was once part of the problem, not because I intended to be, but because I chose silence in the face of injustice. And I've learned that silence is not neutrality. It is complicity. Today, I stand here to say we cannot remain silent any longer." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Change is not a destination. It is a journey we all must embark on together. There will be moments when we feel fear, moments when we doubt our strength. But remember this, every small step matters. And when we walk together, we can achieve the extraordinary." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the front row. There, Imani Carter sat, her expression radiant with pride and empathy. Imani smiled softly and gave a small nod, a silent encouragement. "You've done it, and we will continue to do it together." Thunderous applause erupted, filling the vast space. Avery bowed her head in gratitude, her eyes shimmering with faith and hope. As she stepped off the stage, she could feel the weight of countless hopeful gazes from the young people in the audience. Outside the hall's massive windows, the sky blazed with sunlight. Avery stopped for a moment, gazing out at the warm glow, and whispered to herself, "Thank you, Lord, for guiding me. This is not the end, but only the beginning." Inside the hall, young faces glowed with inspiration. A young man stood, turning to his friend. "We can do this. Let's start today." Avery stepped out of the hall, the light casting her silhouette as a symbol of hope, change, and unwavering determination for a fairer future. The journey for justice isn't over yet. Want more stories that expose hidden truths and inspire change? Stay tuned for our next videos.